A girl is forced to marry a man in a coma to save the family business. But behind the walls of a luxurious mansion, she discovers secrets that could cost her life. When the man suddenly wakes up, he remembers nothing, and the past comes back to him in pieces. Between a conspiracy, betrayal, and new love, she must make a choice that will change everything. Don't forget to subscribe and like so you don't miss new stories. Golden light from a massive chandelier spilled across the marble floor, reflecting off the glass doors and rich oak paneling. An eerie silence hung over Gravestone Hall, broken only by the occasional ticking of an antique clock. The air seemed too thick, too charged with anticipation, as if the building itself knew that something terrible was about to happen. Victoria Moreno sat on the velvet sofa, her back straight and her face marbled. Her fingers clutched the folds of her dress, blue as an autumn sky before a storm, in a death grip. She could hear her heart pounding louder than any sound in the room. "We can't afford to miss this opportunity," Mr. Moreno said, crossing his arms. His voice was calm, almost emotionless. "Graves Industries is our last chance." "An opportunity?" Victoria looked up sharply. "You call that an opportunity? Marrying a man who's unconscious?" Mrs. Moreno nodded, not a trace of regret on her face. "It's a union, Victoria, not a romance. We always knew that love is a luxury that not everyone can afford." "And you want me to become a widow in my lifetime?" "Don't be dramatic," the mother snapped. "Oliver's not dead. He's in a transitional state." Victoria jumped up. "I'm not a doll, Mother. I'm not your property to simply give away in exchange for saving the winery." Mr. Moreno snorted without moving from his spot. "If you don't marry him, the contract with Graves Industries will fall through, and everything that generations have worked for will disappear." "Let it disappear if the price is my freedom." "You don't understand," Mother interjected. "This isn't just about business. This is about our reputation. Oliver is the heir. His family can destroy us with one call, or save us." Silence fell again like a velvet curtain. Only the clock on the wall continued its indifferent countdown. Quiet footsteps came from the stairs. Zoe Moreno, the older sister, the beloved daughter, the ideal. She appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a cashmere cape, her face distorted by tears. "I'm sorry, Vic," she whispered, sinking down onto the sofa next to him. I just can't marry him. He's lying there like a marble statue. This isn't life." "But you promised," Victoria whispered. "The engagement was yours. You should be the one." "I can't," Zoe interrupted with another wave of sobs. "I have my whole life ahead of me. I don't want to be a widow at 26. It would destroy me." Victoria turned to her parents, her eyes filled with fire mixed with despair. "Do you really think I should do this?" "That's not up for discussion," said the father. "You're marrying Oliver Graves. Tomorrow." Gravestone Hall on the wedding day. It looked like an illustration from a fairy tale. White roses decorated every corner, golden ribbons fell from the railings, and an orchestra, hidden behind the columns, played something restrained and mournful. Guests whispered to each other, casting glances towards the altar. "It's him, right? The one in the coma?" "A groom who won't say yes." "Oh my God. She's really marrying him? Is this legal?" Victoria stood before the altar, dressed in an elegant but cold ice-colored dress. Her hands shook as she held the bouquet. Next to her stood a nurse, the official authorized to sign the papers for Oliver. The priest's voice sounded like a sentence. "Victoria Moreno, do you agree to take Oliver Graves as your lawful spouse?" She took a breath, slowly turned and looked at Zoe, sitting in the front row next to some rich stranger. Her sister's face was distant. No pain, no doubt. "I agree," Victoria said, as if exhaling part of her soul. There was no kiss. There was no joy. Only the scratch of a pen on paper as she signed her new destiny. Mrs. Victoria Graves. A tear rolled down her cheek. Later, at the mansion, she walked along the carpeted hallway, accompanied only by the echo of her own footsteps. The servants stood in a row. "Welcome, madam. That's your wife? Look at her. A gold digger. She won't last here long." Victoria did not answer. She raised her head and walked past, like a queen without a throne. Oliver's room was in the east wing, vast, lifeless, filled only with the sounds of medical equipment. He lay on the bed, beautiful, motionless, like a sleeping prince from a fairy tale. But instead of a kiss of love, there were wires and IVs. She came closer, sat down next to him, and took his hand. "I don't know if you can hear me," she whispered. "But I'm here. I'm Victoria, your wife." Her voice was shaking. Oliver's fingers were warm but lifeless. "I didn't want any of this. But if I had to be here, I'll be with you. Until you wake up." Every morning she came to his room, read books from his shelves, ensured that he was carefully looked after, brought fresh flowers to somehow drive away the cold. The servants began to look at her differently. "She really cares about him," they whispered behind his back. "I thought she was just waiting for him to die." One evening, leafing through books in the library, Victoria came across a strange cabinet. Closed. The lock was simple. A pin and a click. Inside is a folder, documents, photos, accident report. But breaks? Official protocol. Technical malfunction. And here, damage to the braking system is intentional, attempted. Who? Who had access? Only his entourage. In the house, in her new home. Her fingers tightened around the folder. Her heart began to beat faster. This was not just a victim. This was a crime. And the criminal may still be walking these halls. The rain outside the window was beating steadily, as if measuring the beats of her heart. The night was quiet, and the mansion seemed like a living being, breathing, listening, remembering. Victoria stood by the window with the folder in her hands, pressing it to her chest as if her own heart was beating in it. She reread every page, every line, looking for confirmation that everything that was happening was not a figment of her imagination. But the lines were clear as dawn. This was not a mistake. This was an assassination attempt. She walked up to Oliver's room again, her steps soft but a storm raging in her chest. He still lay motionless, his skin pale, his dark hair spread out on the pillow. Victoria sat down carefully, as she had done hundreds of times, and took his hand. "I don't know who did this," she whispered, "but I will find out. I swear, Oliver, if someone wanted you dead, they won't get it." She stayed close until the morning, when a pinkish light filtered through the thick curtains. The room seemed to come alive for the first time in a long time, and then it happened. Oliver stirred. At first it was barely noticeable. Fingers, a tiny movement, like an accidental contraction of muscles. Victoria froze, looking at him, holding her breath. Maybe she was imagining it. Maybe she wanted it to be true too much. But then, again, a barely noticeable push. Another one. "Oliver," she breathed, leaning closer. "Can you hear me?" He didn't answer. But something in the air changed. The doctors arrived that afternoon. Dr. Lawrence, a dry man with thick-rimmed glasses, methodically checked his reactions, ran tests, asked questions that remained unanswered. Victoria stood nearby, her hands clasped together, her heart beating so hard she could barely breathe. "His brain is active," Lawrence said finally, without looking up. "Much more active than it was a few weeks ago. He's on the edge. He could wake up at any moment. It wasn't just hope. It was a beginning. But the joy couldn't last forever." In the evening, the phone rang. On the screen was a name she didn't want to see anymore. Zoe. She hesitated but answered anyway. "Victoria, my dear." My sister's voice was sweet as poison. "I've just heard some amazing news. Will our dear Oliver wake up soon? How do you know? Victoria frowned. Oh, please, news travels fast in such circles. And I, as his real fiancé, simply couldn't help but call. He's my husband, Zoe, Victoria interrupted, trying to stay calm. Technically, maybe, but don't forget why you wore that dress in the first place. It was a deal, Vic. A deal, and you were the backup. Victoria caught her breath. What do you mean by this? I just want to remind you, Zoe continued with a light laugh, that as soon as he opens his eyes and sees who should really be there, your little fairy tale will end. The connection was broken. The room suddenly seemed too small, too stuffy to Victoria. She stood up, went to Oliver's bed and placed her palm on his chest. His breathing was even, his chest rising and falling. I won't give you up, she whispered. I won't let you. 2 days passed. Victoria was there every hour, and when she was adjusting the pillow one morning, she felt his hand tense slightly. Then his eyelids fluttered. And suddenly, as if a hurricane had come after a long calm, he opened his eyes. They were dark blue, deep, but there was no recognition in them. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. Victoria suppressed a shudder and took a step closer. Oliver, you woke up. He took a deep breath, his voice hoarse as rusty metal. Who are you? It was as if a knife had entered her heart. I am your wife, Victoria. He pulled back as far as the wires and IVs would allow. His gaze hardened. I don't remember. Later, when the doctor confirmed retrograde amnesia, Victoria simply sat in a chair against the wall, silently, not crying, not moving. It was only when Zoe walked in, wearing a perfectly fitting dress, pearls around her neck, and feigning alarm in her voice, that Victoria realized how much this was just beginning. Oliver, Zoe cried, rushing towards him. Oh God, I was so worried. I thought I'd lost you. He blinked, looking at her in confusion. I don't. You don't remember, I know. Zoe gently touched his cheek. But I'm here. Everything will be fine. Victoria clenched her fists. She could intervene, tell the truth, raise her voice. But he wouldn't remember. Not yet. Which meant all she could do was wait, and not back down. She will be there. Because even if his mind has forgotten, his heart has not. And sooner or later it will tell him which of the two of them was left behind when all was lost. Autumn came unnoticed to Gravestone Hall. One by one, the trees in the gardens shed their scarlet and gold leaves, and the wind brought the smell of rain, damp earth, and something old and forgotten into the windows. The estate was increasingly filled with a tense silence, broken only by the echoing footsteps along the long corridors and Victoria's muffled voice as she read Oliver another book. He still didn't remember anything. He looked at her with polite caution, as if she were a person who was around too often to be a coincidence, but too alien to be a relative. There was no hatred in his eyes, only emptiness and fatigue. Why are you here? He asked one day as she adjusted the pillows behind him. I am your wife, Victoria answered calmly, without looking him in the eyes. Formally, he said with a hint of bitterness. That's what I was told. But we didn't choose this, right? She looked down at her palms. True. But I chose to stay. He was silent for a long time, then abruptly changed the subject. What about my parents? They come, sometimes. She hesitated. But you hardly see them. They think you need peace. He nodded. His face remained marble calm, but Victoria knew there was a storm inside him. She could feel it in the way he pursed his lips when Zoe walked into the room, in the way he tensed when someone reminded him too loudly of the past that needs to be brought back. Zoe was here all the time now, from morning to night. Impeccably dressed, with the scent of expensive perfume and a set of stories that she seemed to make up as she went along. "Remember Paris?" she purred, sitting on the edge of the bed and gently touching Oliver's hand. "How you held me by the waist at the Eiffel Tower and told me the world had no meaning without me." He blinked weakly. "No." "It's okay." She nodded with a soft smile. "We'll have time to remember everything." Victoria watched them from the doorway. Her silence was louder than any words. Her presence was like a nail in Zoe's heart. But she did not retreat. She stayed close, did not pester with stories, did not demand attention, did not play on emotions. She simply was. When Zoe left with false tenderness, Victoria quietly returned and helped Oliver move, taught him how to hold a spoon, put his shirt on him, read to him. "You never tell me about the past," he said one evening when she brought a warm compress for his shoulder. "Because I don't think it matters," she said softly. "What matters is who you want to be now." He thought about it, and then he smiled. A small, almost elusive but sincere smile, which she had not seen since he woke up. The servants began to notice this first. "He's different," they whispered in the kitchen. "Calmer. Less irritated. He looks at her differently. Do you think he remembers? Maybe not with the mind, but the soul seems to remember." Zoe felt it. Her voice grew higher, her movements became more abrupt, and her attempts to win Oliver back became more desperate. One day, she found Victoria in the garden and came up to her, clutching a glass of champagne. "You think you're winning?" she hissed, baring her fangs under a smile. "But you're forgetting who he is. Oliver is mine. Always has been. Always will be." "He was," Victoria said calmly, "until you abandoned him when he became helpless." Zoe narrowed her eyes. "I gave you a role, and now it's time to finish it." "He will decide for himself who will remain in his life," Victoria answered. "And I'm not afraid." "You shouldn't," Zoe hissed, her lips curling into a cold smile. "You don't even know who you're playing with." The next morning, Victoria returned to her investigation. The documents from Oliver's office were still in her room, hidden behind a false closet wall. Every night, while the mansion slept, she compared notes, studied dates, analyzed, looked for anything that would give her a name. And then, one day, she found it. An anonymous bank transfer. The amount was huge. Destination: the repair shop that had serviced Oliver's car 2 days before the accident. She couldn't believe her eyes. It was proof. The next morning, without telling anyone, she went to the same workshop. The smell of oil and burnt rubber wafted through the gate. The man in the apron barely glanced at her as she approached the counter. "I need to talk," she said. "About what?" "About the car you were repairing. Graves M14 with private numbers." He tensed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Victoria took a photo of the bank transfer out of her bag. "Then explain it." The mechanic turned pale. He was silent for a few seconds, then wiped his palms and said quietly, "I don't know who she is, just a blonde. Expensive clothes, paid in advance, said she wanted a little glitch. Name? No idea. It wasn't named, but Victoria knew. She knew even before she heard the description. Only one woman fit the bill. Zoe. She returned to Gravestone Hall, her face hard with anger. In the garden, among the late dahlias, Zoe sat with a glass of white wine, as if everything belonged to her. "It was you," Victoria said, approaching. Zoe didn't even flinch. She slowly put the glass down and turned around. "So you guessed it. You tried to kill him." "I wasn't trying," Zoe corrected. "I just put him away. Temporarily. He became a burden. You know how that happens." "You are a monster." "No, I'm a realist, and you were a mistake." "I'll tell him. And everyone. I'll pass everything on to the police." "Do that," Zoe hissed, "and you'll ruin him and yourself. Do you think he'll survive another storm?" Do you think his family will accept it? You'll destroy everything you've built, and he'll be alone again. Victoria gritted her teeth. Then let him decide for himself. And that night, when the sky was torn apart by flashes of lightning, Oliver, sitting in a chair by the window, suddenly squeezed his temples and whispered, "I remember." The pain hit suddenly, as if someone's hand had abruptly pulled 1,000 sharp fragments out of his head. Oliver clutched his temples, his breathing became heavy, shadows and flashes swam before his eyes. Scraps of memory came flooding back, blurred but vivid. The glare of headlights, the wet road, the skidding of tires, and a face, a woman's face, a blonde with a cold, calculating smile. She stood at the edge of the road and watched, not saving, just watched. He wanted to scream, but the sound remained inside. "Everything's fine," Victoria whispered, rushing towards him. "You're here. You're okay." He looked at her. Really. And for the first time in weeks, her face didn't seem foreign to him. It was familiar, native. "I saw her," he croaked. "She stood there. She didn't do anything. She knew." Victoria squatted in front of him, cupping his face in her hands. "It was Zoe, right?" He nodded. Hesitantly, but he nodded. "I knew," Victoria whispered. "And I can prove it." He grabbed her wrists as if he was afraid she would disappear. "Don't leave me," he said quietly. "Please." I never left. Later that night, everyone was at the house. Oliver's parents, the cold and aloof Charles Graves, his mother, Evelyn, reserved but keenly observant, uncles, cousins, family advisors, and Zoe, in her new dress, with a glass of champagne and an impassive mask on her face. Oliver came down the stairs, dressed in a dark blue sweater and trousers. He walked firmly, confidently. He stopped at the top step. Silence hung over the hall. "I have something you need to hear," he said, looking straight at Zoe. "I remembered everything." Zoe didn't move. Her fingers only tightened around the stem of the glass. "I remember the road. I remember the brakes failing. I remember you standing there and watching, not calling for help, not trying to save me. You wanted me to die." "This is absurd," she said sharply, her voice shaking. "This is the aftermath of trauma. You are confusing reality with a dream." "I have proof," Victoria said, stepping forward. She had a folder in her hands. A wire transfer, a mechanic's testimony, security cameras. It all points to you, Zoe. The whispers rolled through the room like a storm. Someone gasped. Evelyn Graves pressed her lips into a thin line, but said nothing. Zoe took a step back, but immediately straightened up, her voice becoming poisonously gentle. "And you, Victoria? Do you think that staying by his side while he lies in bed makes you a saint? You are his wife on paper, but you are nobody. You were a substitute, temporary, just a convenient shadow." "Then why am I here and not you?" Victoria answered. "Why doesn't he call for you when he wakes up in pain? Why do I know where it hurts, how hard it is for him to breathe, what books he likes? Because I was here. I stayed when everyone else left." Oliver took a step forward, his voice low and firm. "She saved me. When I was in the dark, she spoke to me. When I couldn't move, she held my hand. And you just waited for me to die so you could get yours." Zoe turned pale. The champagne in her glass trembled. "You can't prove it. You don't have a record of my words. You don't have my confession. But I have your motive, and now my memory," Oliver said. He turned to his parents. "I don't want to see her in this house anymore." Evelyn nodded. "Vanessa," she said, using her name without its usual warmth for the first time, "you have dishonored our family. Go away." "You can't," Zoe began breathlessly. "We can," Charles said harshly, "and we will. You're crossed out. Forever." Zoe stood in the middle of the room, broken, ridiculed. But no one looked at her with pity anymore. She turned to Victoria, and there was something in her eyes that sent a chill down her spine. "It's not over yet," she whispered. "For you, it's the end," Victoria answered. "But for us, it's just the beginning." The next morning, the air in the mansion was lighter. The servants smiled as Victoria passed. Oliver ate breakfast in the dining room, alone. His fingers no longer trembled as he held his cup. He looked stronger, more confident, revived. After breakfast, he found her in the garden. "A walk?" he suggested, holding out his hand. They walked among the golden trees, in silence. Victoria glanced at him furtively. He looked as he had when she first saw his photograph in the newspaper. Charismatic, confident, but now, softer. "Thank you," he said suddenly. "For what?" "For not giving up. For not leaving." She smiled. "I couldn't. I just knew you'd come back." He stopped, looked at her, and there was something new in his eyes, or, on the contrary, long forgotten. "I want you to know. I don't remember every detail, but I feel it. I know that you are my real self. I was afraid you would never say it. And I was afraid that you would leave before I realized it." He took her hand. He squeezed it tightly, and with that simplicity, with that touch, everything changed. The path through the comatose darkness, through betrayal, lies, pain, and struggle, led to this very moment, to a look that needed no words, to a touch that said more than 1,000 confessions. And against the backdrop of autumn light, among the scarlet leaves, in a garden that once seemed alien, Victoria finally felt she was home. "Are you sure?" Victoria looked at Oliver with hidden fear. "This will be the first time you go outside the garden." "I want this," he said quietly, pulling on his coat. "And I want you here." She nodded, hiding her smile in the collar of her warm scarf. Since the beginning of his recovery, they had spent almost all their time together. Walks in the garden, shared meals, long evenings reading. But today, he wanted more. Today, he wanted to go back to the city. They drove out of the gates of Gravestone Hall in silence. The alleys, old mansions, shop windows flashed past. Victoria drove, and every time he silently touched her hand, it seemed to her that her heart would stop. "What do you feel?" she asked when they stopped at the park. "It's like I woke up in someone else's life. Everything seems familiar, but not mine." "And me?" Oliver looked at her, holding his gaze. "You are like an anchor. Like the only thing that hasn't disappeared." They walked along a gravel path, surrounded by the rustling of leaves, children playing, the sound of birdsong. Everything was ordinary, but it was the ordinary that became special. He walked slowly, leaning on his cane, but did not ask for help. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life," he said, looking ahead. "Like someone was living my life for me, making decisions, making choices, and now I have to pick up the pieces." "You can start over," Victoria said softly, "on your own terms. It's scary, and attractive, especially if I start with you." She froze. It was the first time he had spoken so directly. The words seemed to settle inside her, warming her. "I'm always here," she whispered. At that moment, a man approached them, in an expensive coat with a sharp gaze. "Oliver?" "Oh, finally. We all thought you'd never wake up." "Excuse me." Oliver frowned. "Have we met?" Grayson Wells. "I worked with your father. Joint projects, supplies, investments. You even planned to finance my new hotel." "I'm sorry," Oliver repeated. "I don't remember anything about it." "Oh, that's nothing. The main thing is that you're back. I hope we can still count on your interest." Victoria took a step forward. "Sorry, but Oliver is not doing business yet. He needs peace." Of course. Of course, the man smiled, but there was a coldness in his eyes. Just tell your father that I stopped by. When he left, Oliver said quietly, I don't trust him. I don't know why, but there's something about him. You don't owe anything to anyone, Victoria said firmly. Now is your life. You choose who to communicate with and what to do. He nodded. They continued walking and said no more about Wells. But there was a sense of foreboding in the air, as if this conversation was not yet over. Later, at home, they sat by the fireplace. The room was dim, the fire casting a soft glow on the walls, and the air smelled of cinnamon and smoke. Victoria, he began, suddenly serious, tell me honestly, why did you stay back then, when everything was so hopeless? I don't know, she answered after a pause. Maybe because I saw you as a person, not a business deal. Maybe because I wanted to prove that I wasn't like them. Or because I already began to feel that you were important to me. Even when I couldn't speak? Right then. He reached out and took her palm. And now I want to be important to you for real. Consciously. Not by contract. Not by force. She looked up. You say this, like, as a person who is ready to make a choice again. But this time, himself. And I choose you, Victoria. Tears came to her eyes, but she held them back. I choose you too, she whispered. That same night, the silence of the mansion was broken by a ringing bell. Evelyn answered. A few minutes later, she entered the office, her face pale from tension. Oliver, we need to talk. Did something happen? It's about Zoe. Victoria tensed. What's wrong with her? She announced her engagement to Grayson Wells. Oliver froze. Wells, the one I worked with? That's him. She always knew how to choose the moment. Do you think this is a coincidence? Victoria asked quietly. Not for a second, he replied. She didn't leave. She just chose a new path. Victoria felt her insides tighten. Zoe was dangerous, even in the shadows. And now she had a new ally. I think this is just the beginning, she whispered. And we must be ready. The wind pounded hard against the windows, and Gravestone Hall seemed like a ship in a storm, stable but surrounded by something unsettling, almost ominous. Victoria stood by the fireplace, watching the flames consume the logs. In the reflection of the glass panel, she saw Oliver, sitting in his chair, staring out into the darkness beyond. Silent. I saw the way she looked at me, he said quietly. That night before the accident. When I got into the car. There was relief in her eyes, not worry, not love, relief. Victoria came closer, knelt down in front of him, and took his hand. So you remember more than you thought. Memories come in pieces. Sometimes I don't know what to believe, but I'm sure of one thing. I don't want to go back to that life, to my old self. What do you want to be? He looked at her, long, attentively. To those who make choices with their hearts, and not with paper calculations. To those who value those who are there in difficult moments, and not just at social gatherings. She squeezed his hand tighter. Then you have already become one. The next day, Oliver decided to do something he had been putting off since waking up. He called his father into the study. The atmosphere in the room became thick as steam. Did you want something? Charles Graves stood at the window without turning around. Yes, I want to talk about the past and about the future. The past is useless if you don't remember it, Father said sharply. And the future depends on how willing you are to take responsibility again. I'm ready, Oliver said calmly, but on my terms. Charles turned around slowly. Do you want to run a business? I want to understand what I sign, who I work with. I want to separate those who were really with me from those who just used me. And you think Victoria is one of ours? I don't think anymore. I know. Charles came closer and took a long look at him. You have become different. Hope. Let's see how long you can stay afloat without my help. Oliver chuckled. It depends on how many stones you throw. When Charles left, Victoria entered the office. Everything is fine? He's not thrilled, but I don't care. I don't want to be the person who's told who to live with and who to trust anymore. She came closer and kissed him on the temple. I'm proud of you. That evening, the mansion received unexpected news. Zoe and Wells were throwing a party in honor of the union of the two strongest houses. The invitation sent by mail read in gold letters, Oliver Graves and his companion are also invited. This is a provocation, Evelyn said quietly, squeezing the invitation in her fingers. It's a warning, Victoria corrected. She didn't let you go, she just changed the game. Are you coming? She asked Oliver later, when they were alone. I have to. If I run away, I'll show weakness, and I'm not a victim anymore. Victoria sighed. Then I'll go with you. He nodded. The corners of his lips smiled. I didn't ask, but I knew you would say it. The reception was held at the Caesarian Hotel, now officially owned by Wells. Everything was polished to a shine, crystal, gold, smooth marble, and too many smiles. Zoe appeared in a sparkling silver dress, as if she had stepped off the cover of a magazine. She greeted them with a dazzling smile. It's so nice of you to come. Her voice was soft, but there was tension in every word. Oliver, you look more alive than I expected. And you are more poisonous than I remembered, he retorted without smiling. I'm glad you chose your companion. Her gaze slid over Victoria. Very devotedly. She was there when everyone disappeared. I would stay, said Zoe, if they let me. You left before anyone could stop you. Wells came up and extended his hand to Oliver. Glad you're in shape. Your father and I have some interesting mergers to discuss. I'm not discussing anything Zoe was involved in anymore, Oliver said coldly. And if you're involved, then I'm not discussing you either. There was a pause, like the calm before a storm. The guests froze, feeling the tension. Victoria silently stood closer to Oliver, her hand lightly touching his elbow. You can't hide behind her forever, Wells whispered. I'm not hiding, Oliver said. I stand with those who deserve it. They left the reception early. No scenes, no words, but loud enough to make it an event. Already at home in their bedroom, Oliver closed the door behind him and leaned against the doorframe. The room smelled of lavender and rain. Victoria was sitting by the window, barefoot in a simple warm robe, with a mug of tea in her hands. You did it, she said. With you, yes. He came up to her, knelt down in front of her. He took the mug and put it on the table. He took the robe off her shoulders. His palms were warm. His lips were gentle. I don't know who I was before, but I know who I want to be now. Who? She whispered. To those who will lie down next to you every night and wake up first every morning to watch you sleep. She reached out to him, kissed him, long, quietly, with hope and greed. It was not just a kiss, it was a vow. The storm began suddenly. The sky, clear until recently, darkened, and the first drops of rain began to pound the glass, as if someone was insistently demanding to be let into the house. Victoria was standing in the library, looking through papers, when footsteps were heard. Oliver entered, his hair disheveled, his gaze anxious. Have you seen the reports for last quarter? He asked from the doorway. I looked through the archives and there are a lot of inconsistencies there. What are you talking about? He threw a thin folder on the table. It opened and documents with clear signatures and numbers fell out. Here, the signatures are not mine. And the transfer amount is too big to pass by. This is a deal with Caesarian Development, even before I came out of the coma. Victoria took the sheet of paper and ran her eyes over it. There is a signature here, but it is not yours. And it's not a fake. Oliver walked around the room. It's a power of attorney. Someone acted on my behalf. You only had one power of attorney, your mother's, and Zoe. He stopped abruptly. My mother only used the power of attorney for medical care, but Zoe could do everything. And now this merger with Kassarian seems not just strange, it's dangerous. I don't want my company to be trapped. Do you think she started all this before the accident? I think so. And she expected me to never wake up. Victoria sat up slowly, looking at the documents. If this is true, then she had more than just a personal reason. She had a motive. Money, control, freedom from me. Oliver clenched his fists. She wanted to be a widow with the keys to the safe. What can we do? We have accounting traces. Now we need to find legal ones. Who certified these signatures? What lawyers were involved? And most importantly, who received the money? The next morning, they headed downtown to the old law firm where all the family's business was handled. Oliver held his ground, even when the elevator got stuck between floors for a few seconds. Victoria, standing next to him, could feel the tension in his shoulders, but he didn't flinch. Mr. Graves, Mrs. Graves, Attorney Randall Morgan stood as they entered the office. It's good to see you. I hope you're well. It would be better if you explained how my signature is on the Kassarian merger file, Oliver began without further ado, pulling out the document. And why the archives list my participation in a meeting when I was in a coma. Morgan lost color for a moment. There must be a mistake. There can't be a mistake with the notarization, Victoria said sternly. We want to know who acted on Oliver's behalf. By power of attorney. The lawyer sighed and raised his hands. It was a representation on behalf of Zoe Moreno. She had full legal power of attorney. All documents were checked. And who profited from this agreement? Oliver asked. Mr. Wells. And part of it went to a private foundation registered to Moreno. I should have notified, but I was told. Said? Oliver stepped forward. Who told you? Morgan hesitated. Your father. Oliver froze. Did he know? I can't say more without an official request. You've said enough, Oliver snapped. Pack up all the documents on this case. That's it. They'll be handed over to the independent auditor tomorrow. When they left the office, Victoria did not speak right away. Only in the car did she quietly ask, Do you believe he knew? Yes. He always knew what he was doing. Oliver gripped the steering wheel, and if he supported Zoe, it means he had his own calculations. He wanted to get rid of me, or at the very least control me, even in an unconscious state. So now we have two enemies. Not enemies, players, but I write the rules myself now. They were silent for the rest of the journey. Only when they turned towards the house did Oliver suddenly say, Do you know what the scariest thing is? What? That I almost let myself be convinced that I was the person they wanted me to be. Weak, submissive. But you. He stopped the car and turned to face her. You pulled me out of it. With your voice. With your silence. With your honesty. I just couldn't help it, she whispered. You were worth it. You are my chance. Not for salvation, for the present. He leaned down, touched his lips to her forehead, and in that moment, Victoria knew. Now everything would be different. They were not just surviving. They were becoming one. Victoria woke up in the middle of the night from the light patter of rain on the glass and the feeling that something was wrong. The room was dark, only a faint glow from the street lamp penetrated through the curtains. Oliver was sleeping next to her. His face was calm, his breathing even. But the anxiety did not go away. She stood up, pulled on her dressing gown, and walked out into the hallway, trying to make no noise. Everything around her was shrouded in semi-darkness. The old walls of Gravestone Hall oozed history and something else, something that now made her more wary than usual. She tiptoed past the library, past the stairs, until she heard muffled voices. The voices came from Charles's office. "He's too quick to grasp things," the man said with a slight southern accent. "I didn't expect him to bring up the Caesarian papers." "He shouldn't have," Charles replied. "He should have played his part and not asked questions. And now he has Victoria. She's not just nearby, she's thinking, searching. She's a threat. Are you suggesting to get rid of her? No. I suggest we make her leave on her own." Victoria pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath. Her heart was pounding so loudly that it seemed like it could be heard. After a few seconds, she stepped back, trying not to make a sound, and returned to the room. She closed the door, leaned against it, and clenched her fists. The threat has become real. She didn't tell Oliver in the morning. He woke early, with clear eyes and determination in his voice. "Today I will talk to my mother, without my father. If he really participated in this, I want to know it from her." Victoria nodded. She understood how hard it was to take this step, but she also knew that there was no escaping the truth. That same day, in the winter garden where lemons and jasmine grew, Evelyn sat at a small table, stirring her tea. Her face was as impenetrable as a marble statue, but her eyes sparkled with a sharp, cold life. "Mother," Oliver began, sitting down opposite, "I didn't come as a son. I came as the man you trusted with your blood. I want to know the truth." "What truth exactly are you asking about?" she asked calmly. "Did you know that my father signed documents with Zoe during my coma?" A pause. Short. But there was a whole world in it. "Yes." "Why?" "Because he believed that you wouldn't wake up, and that the company wouldn't survive without a firm hand." "And you?" Evelyn looked down. "I was afraid, not for the business, for you. For the fact that if you woke up and found out how you were betrayed, you would break." "I didn't break," he said quietly. "Because Victoria held me. I can see it." Her voice wavered. "I thought she was just a shadow, a figure on duty put in place at the right moment. But she stayed when no one else did, and you became different next to her. Then help me. If you are really for me, choose a side." Evelyn was silent for a long time, and then nodded. "I'll find a lawyer. My source. You'll get everything you need. But Oliver," she looked at him seriously, "it'll be war. Your blood won't forgive you." He stood up, walked over to her, and touched her shoulder. "Then let it be war. But I will not retreat." Victoria still hadn't told him about the conversation that night. Not yet. She needed to be sure of one thing. She had met Marcus, the family's former lawyer, who had retired a year before the accident. They had met in a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He was elderly, but his eyes sparkled with intelligence. "I'm not surprised you came," he said, sipping his coffee. "You're the one they're whispering about in the house." "What do you know about the merger with Caesarian?" "I left before that, but I heard the talk. Zoe was actively promoting the project. Wells was against it until he got control of some of the assets. And then suddenly he became her ally." "Was it a trap?" "Of course. He used her, and she thought she was using him. But there is something more important." "What?" "Wells is negotiating the sale of some of the Graves' properties in Asia. It was supposed to be a secret, but I've learned that the deal is almost done, without Oliver's knowledge. But that's impossible. He's the boss." "Formally, yes. But the old man still signs the documents. Your father-in-law hasn't given up control completely." Victoria pursed her lips. "Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to know." When she got home, Oliver was sitting in the library, surrounded by papers. She put her hand on his shoulder and he looked up. "There's something you're not telling me," he said. I heard your father and Wells talking about me. Last night. What? They want to make me leave? Softly. Through pressure. Manipulation. Intimidation. But it doesn't matter. It matters. He stood up. Because now we know this isn't just a power of attorney story. This is corporate treason, and you're at the center of it because of me. I don't regret it. He came closer and cupped her face in his hands. I won't let anyone take you away from me. Not my father, not the past, not Zoe. Then we must act first. Oliver nodded, his voice hard as steel. We're starting tomorrow. And they'll learn what it's like to deal not with a boy in a coma, but with a man who's returned, not alone. The boardroom at Graves Industries headquarters resembled a chessboard. Cold glass walls, black and white chairs along a long table, and the players facing each other. Oliver sat at the head, calm, reserved, in a dark graphite suit that made him look not just an heir, but a full-fledged leader. To his right was Victoria. To his left was Evelyn. A little further back were the new lawyers, unconnected to their father. Everyone knew that today would be more than just a discussion. This was the final game. Where is he? Oliver asked, glancing at his watch. He will come, Evelyn replied. He is too proud not to come. The door opened and Charles Graves walked in with Wells. They were accompanied by another lawyer, a smug, predatory-eyed man. Wells sat down, crossing his legs. Charles sat silently across from his son. So you decided to go all the way, he finally said. I decided to go honest, Oliver replied. Something you didn't teach me. Emotions are a bad advisor in business, but the truth is a reliable partner. The truth is, you're not ready. You're too soft, too naive. You think that by exposing a few props you can tear down the house? I'm not going to tear it down. I'm building anew. Wells chuckled. Then you'll regret it. Your father and I have already finalized most of the deal. The investors are on our side. The courts will drag on. You'll lose time. Victoria leaned forward. Only if we don't have an audit. And we do. Oliver nodded to the lawyer, who pulled out a folder revealing the official findings: forged signatures, use of invalid power of attorney, unauthorized access to corporate accounts. All confirmed. It's a bluff, Charles said coldly. Even if it's true, you won't win the trial. It will go on for years. I don't want a trial, Oliver said. I want you to leave, voluntarily, with a signature. Are you threatening? I give you a choice. Either you leave with honor and save face, or I submit the documents, and you are carried out with the reputation of a criminal. The silence became deafening. Charles looked at his wife. Evelyn looked straight at him, mercilessly. Did you know? He asked. Ever since our son woke up, I looked at him differently. And at you, too. So you're against it, too? No. I'm for him. Charles stood up and went to the window. He was silent for a long time. Then he took a pen out of his pocket and signed the document on the table. Whatever you want, he said without looking. But remember, in this world, the good do not rule for long. I'm not kind, Oliver replied. I'm just honest. As they walked out of the building, Victoria held his hand tightly, the wind blowing through her hair, and he looked out onto the street, where people were hurrying, unaware that an era had just ended in one of the buildings. Is that all? She asked quietly. Almost. There's one last step left. That evening they returned to Gravestone Hall. Victoria went up to the studio where she had once sat at night, sorting through papers. Oliver went to the study. There, in a drawer, he found a letter, handwritten, his mother's handwriting. If you're reading this, then you've won. But remember, it's not the power itself that matters. It's how you use it. You're not just Graves. You're Oliver. And you're free to be whoever you want to be. Don't be afraid. I'm with you. Always. He folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Later, in their shared bedroom, Victoria took the dress off the hanger, the same one she had worn when she married the stranger. It still smelled of that long-ago troubled night. She approached him with it in her hands. I don't want this dress to be a symbol of a deal. Then let's change its meaning, Oliver said. He pulled a small box out of the drawer. Inside was a ring. Not at all like the one they had at their paper wedding. This ring was simple but alive, with an ocean-colored stone and gold that felt warm against his fingers. Marry me. For real. No contracts. No strings attached. Just because you're my heart. Victoria looked at him for a long time, and then she whispered, Yes, now, yes. The ceremony was modest, not because they didn't have the means or the opportunity to throw a feast for the whole world, but because neither Victoria nor Oliver wanted pomp. After all they had been through, what they needed was not a stage, but silence, not applause, but the truth. The wedding took place in the garden of Gravestone Hall. The autumn trees swayed in the light breeze, the sun broke through the leaves, drawing patterns on the white tablecloth. Victoria walked along the path barefoot. Her dress was simple, flowing, a little lighter than pearls. Her hair was gathered in a soft bun. On her lips there was a smile, so sincere that all the guests' throats and hearts were squeezed at the same time. Oliver was waiting for her at the arch woven from wildflowers. No guards, no tie. Just him, his palms open to meet hers and his gaze, warm, attentive, deep. He looked at her as if he was seeing her for the first time, and at the same time, as if she were someone he had known all his life. Are you nervous? She whispered, stopping in front of him. No, he answered with a slight smile. I'm home. They held hands as the priest began to speak. His voice had that intonation that comes when a person feels the words rather than just reads them. The guests barely breathed. Father Oliver was not among them. He had left, leaving everything and no farewell letter. But Evelyn sat in the front row, next to former enemies who had become allies. Even Attorney Morgan, whom Oliver had once wanted to throw out, now looked at him with respect. I swear, Oliver said, looking straight into Victoria's eyes, that from today on, you will not just be my wife. You will be my compass, my anchor, my future. And I, she answered, trembling with emotion, swear to be near, in storm and calm, not because it has to be that way, but because I can't do otherwise. When they kissed, the sky became brighter, or so it seemed. Or maybe it was just that the whole world finally stopped interfering with their happiness. A week later, they woke up in a new house. Not a mansion full of shadows, but a bright house on a hill, with panoramic windows and wooden floors that were pleasant to walk on barefoot. It was their choice to leave behind the palaces and family ghosts. Victoria put the books on the new shelves, and Oliver brought coffee and sat by the window, watching her move around the room. You still don't believe this happened? She asked, smiling. Sometimes I'm afraid that this is a dream, that I'll wake up in that room again, alone. She came over, sat down next to him, and hugged him around the shoulders. This is no longer a dream, and not a ward. This is life. He touched her hand and kissed her palm. I want us to do something of our own. A business, a project. Something that is not connected to the family name. Something that will be only ours. I've wanted to offer you this for a long time, she said. I was thinking about a foundation for women in difficult life situations so that they could study, work, build their future. It's perfect. He looked at her with admiration. You didn't just save me. You changed everything I knew about the force. She laughed. And you didn't just survive. You became the man I would choose again, and again. They started working on the fund that same month. They called it Elora, after an old word meaning a light that never goes out. Victoria wrote the mission. Oliver sought investors, but without pressure, without tricks. Everything was transparent. They were united in something that required neither prenuptial agreements nor family seals. Sometimes they returned to Gravestone to visit Evelyn, to pick up old books, to check on the workers. But the house was no longer the center of their world. It was just a page. One such day, when the leaves had already begun to fall and the air smelled fresh and of apples, Victoria and Oliver stopped on the path by the old apple tree. He held her hand. She held a basket of fruit. And suddenly Oliver said, "You know what's weird?" "What?" "I am grateful, even for the fact that I was in a coma." She looked at him in surprise. "Why?" "Because if it hadn't happened, I would never have met you for real. I knew you formally. Through papers, through someone else's will, and now I know you with my heart. Then I am grateful too, for the fact that the world did not let us go our separate ways." He tried. "Yes, but we are stubborn." They laughed, and then he suddenly got down on one knee. "I already proposed to you, I know, and you already said yes. But, Victoria..." He took a small ring out of his pocket, simple, silver, just in case. "If one day you want to give up everything, run away, forget, I will ask you again, and again, and again." She sat down next to him, hugged him, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I will never leave, no matter how many times you ask." And this kiss, without cameras, without guests, without outfits, became a real vow. Life went on as usual. There were challenges, there were difficulties, but they faced them together. And every time the past reminded them of itself, they held hands tighter. Because now, in this world where everything changes, there was an island that could not be moved by storm or time. And the name of this island was love. True. Not at first sight, but at first betrayal, at first choice, at first honesty. A love they grew themselves.